All right, guys, we're back again for the Pat Stedman interview series show podcasts. And today we have Oliver Anwar, one of the great fitness gurus on Twitter and Instagram. Really just a huge fan of your content, man. I really appreciate what you put out there. I think it's a gift to be able to both teach people in, ideas, concepts, information, um, pacing the public for where it's at while not being like a platitude account. And I think that you really like bridge that very well, that you're able to really hit like the everyman who's looking to get better with fitness, but not just feed them the superficial shit. So it's good to have you on, and we want to talk. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit of fitness stuff because you're the fitness guy, but I also want to talk about some dating stuff as well.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into this?
Well, firstly, thank you, Pat. I really appreciate the kind words. And I've been following you for a while, so it's a privilege to be on today. My name's Oliver, and I got started being fit playing football, soccer for the US guys over in the UK. Played a decent level as a young kid, got to about 16, 17, wasn't going to make it as a professional. So I decided to put all my energy into kind of fitness because I was a short, skinny, insecure guy that just had his dreams crushed of playing football professionally. So I had to put all that energy somewhere. So I put it into training myself. I think the environment of being around a lot of big jocks, you could say, rugby players that were bigger, stronger, more muscular than me, definitely more confident, drove me to really develop my health and fitness because again, I wanted to kind of max out in that area. So I started doing that and started getting some good results, made some mistakes, of course. And when I went to university, when I was in my early 20s, I started getting some questions from people and a lot of attention as to how to actually develop your body and how to do it, sustainably in the right way, and actually get results without hurting yourself. So I set up a website, set up a business at university, and 6 years down the line now, I'm now doing this full time, and I'm on Twitter, as you guys know, so putting out a lot of content on there, and this is now my full-time gig. So that kind of brings us up to where we are now.
Amazing. So, I mean, entrepreneur life. I mean, how I know that you don't necessarily have experience with it in other domains, but I'm just kind of interested because the fitness industry, I mean, all of the big three, money, fitness, dating, are saturated industries. Mine's probably the least saturated, if we're being honest here, because it's still kind of weird. But it's not weird to want to get in shape, and it's not weird to want to make money. It's not weird to want to improve with women either. But I mean, it's got disappearing, but still maybe slight stigma for the normie. But in the fitness world, I mean, especially online, and I'm curious because you have a really successful brand. So what have you done to differentiate yourself so much in your perspective? I mean, what's allowed this kind of growth? I mean, you're 50 something K on Twitter. What are you on Instagram?
40K.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're well in that mid 5-figure range. So what happened? What did you do?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it came down to really leaning into what I cared about and what I was passionate about. And I think for a lot of people, they'd be very successful if they leaned into the things that they really enjoy. Because when you start out, there's a lot of hours, there's a lot of doing stuff for free, posting, not getting many clients, and it takes you a while to build up some momentum. There's that initial inertia with anything you do, right? It always sucks, right? The first time you go to the gym, it sucks because you're aching and you need to just push through until you get there. And the good thing with the business that you enjoy is you push through because you're passionate about it and you want to help people in that realm, and you're, let's say, potentially an expert in it. So I started learning a lot. I started mastering my craft as much as I could and developing that. And then really kind of sharing a lot of the mistakes I made, the journey that I've been on, and things like that. And people started to listen, which was good. I started sharing health, workouts, and things like that, but also kind of like my views on life and my other side of things that I think really good personal brands do is they share everything about them, right? They share their travels, their childhood, their political views and things like that. Whether people agree or not, that people will be attracted to Pat Stedman, right? Like, Pat, you're a great dating coach, but they're also attracted to other parts about you, your life, the way you carry yourself, your values, and things like that. So I started building that out, and that's really helped me build my audience. And I think secondly with that is really specifically niching down on a specific type of person to help. So for me, I chose to work with entrepreneurs because, number one, these guys are fucking disciplined, and I like working with disciplined guys because a lot of the attributes that made them successful in business will actually make them successful with their body, right? Maybe it's not working right now, but it will do once we kind of apply certain things, which is great. The second thing, I think entrepreneurs have some of the biggest needs out there because these guys develop a lot of their time into investing into their business, and they're actually pretty beat up, right? Very stressed, overweight, not very muscular, very unhealthy because they put all their energy into building this business, whether that's for their family or to build a legacy, and they kind of put themselves second. And it actually is very fulfilling for me to actually take somebody from very unhealthy, whether that's having a heart attack, very unconfident, to actually getting healthy again and feeling great. So for me, there's a big part of satisfaction in that. And from a marketing point of view, it's great when you niche down because I kind of understand when an entrepreneur comes in, what his pain points are, how we're going to kind of structure his workouts and his day, how we're going to approach his nutrition and food, because he's going to have a completely different schedule to somebody that is maybe just working a 9 to 5 or, works a trade job, right? The lifestyles are different. So for me, niching down really helped with that, and kind of developing my brand.
So dig a little bit more into the entrepreneur mindset when it comes to fitness. I mean, do you feel, because it's interesting, like when there's obviously a category, you're totally right, by the way. I mean, the amount, I've been thinking about this a lot recently because even though fitness is becoming more of a priority, I was looking at the sort of direction of the big three, and it was business, relationship, fitness. And I'm actually coming to the conclusion more that it's the opposite, that you really want to flip it, and that you need to focus on fitness and then your relationships. And then after that, because you're building from the most inner foundations in terms of self and energy cultivation, that making money comes easier. So that's kind of the reason I like, maybe people have seen me like, Pat hasn't posted as much in the last 2 weeks as he used to. It's like, yeah, I'm kind of like recalibrating everything right now. So
Nice.
do you find like that's like a very common thing that they have that pyramid maybe inverted the opposite direction?
Yeah, I think it's true, and I think especially when you look at men, if you ask them, do they want a six pack or do they want a Ferrari? They probably want a Ferrari, right? And that all comes from money. So it's kind of like there's this. You could say that the way the world is, maybe people value money more than they do health, right? So people straight away dive for the entrepreneurial venture and to build as much money, and I think that that's great, but I think that you can do it all, man. I think that, like you said there, how do you build the pyramid? Well, I think you can build all of it, but it does start with the foundation of health, because once you're healthy, it really does spiral into every other part of your life. And the attributes that you learn in building your body, consistency, patience, discipline, emotional control, these apply to your relationships and business. And if anything, the easiest gateway to achieving this is through your health and fitness to begin with, because your business and relationships are much harder than just getting a fit body, right? They're much more complicated, much more nuanced, and things like that. So if you can actually build a foundation of your health first and foremost, that's then going to transition into the more difficult things that you have to tackle in life, such as relationships and business.
So do you think that the fitness industry overcomplicates it just as a way of trying to differentiate and maybe like a less sophisticated, I mean, not to pump you up too much, but you picked like a market niche to niche down in and talking to their emotional pain points, whereas I think some, obviously there are other fitness coaches who do similar things in other demographics, but one thing that I think a lot of fitness guys do also, and maybe the less successful ones, I don't know, I can't maybe say that definitively, but they'll focus on, really either dissing this exercise and pumping up this other exercise, and some of that may just be controversy creation. One of the obviously really big ones that just never ends, when I
Yep.
eavesdrop on these things, is the calories versus specific food. Like, is it just calories in, calories out, versus does it matter what kind of calories you consume? That's one of the ones, perennial ones, never ends.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, do you think that a lot of this stuff is really just overcomplicated, and is that a marketing strategy, or?
Yeah, to be truthfully honest, I do think that people overcomplicate things and they kind of like to have a war on certain things because, once you kind of swear that you're keto, people love cults, man, and people love groups and they like to be part of something and they love ideology, right? What's that? Sorry?
The manosphere. They love
Yeah. Well,
the whole thing.
exactly, right? If you look at the red pill, right, it's kind of like that. You also get it with fitness, and people like to swear by things because it gives them a sense of importance and it gives them a sense of identity as well. And that's great if you kind of want to do that, but is that really like the most sustainable way to approach your health? Probably not, right? Cutting out carbohydrates when you live a social life, you like to have fun and go and have drinks, is probably not a good strategy. Doing keto, like, how long are you going to keep that up for? Whereas if you can stick to a balanced approach where you kind of are more inclusive than you are exclusive, don't do anything too crazy, kind of lift weights consistently, progressively try and get stronger, sleep for 8 hours, and kind of track your food intake, get enough protein, make sure most of that is from whole foods. That's kind of the blueprint right there, guys. You know what I mean? And every single other person will say, okay, no, it needs to be different, it needs to be that. But that's kind of the crux of everything there. And people like to dress it up differently for marketing and to build a cult. But if you just want to get better with your health and fitness, that's kind of the principles that you kind of need to follow.
Mm-hmm. So here's one. People are gonna know me with wine. And by the way, guys, cut back dramatically with this stuff. Cut
Oh,
back with it.
nice.
Yeah, it's. But I'm really curious. Like, honestly, I don't even. I just kind of had a change in priorities. You just bring a lot of awareness to certain habits, and you think about it, and you think about how it affects you, and you see like maybe a couple of other things that are going on, and you're like, well, wait a minute, are they linked to this? Um, I'm curious from like, obviously heavy drinking is terrible for you.
Mhm.
And moderate drinking, depending on what you determine as moderate drinking, probably isn't good. I mean, maybe you can make an argument that it doesn't really matter if you are a light drinker versus a non-drinker in the grand scheme of things. But I'm curious, like, just be real with people. How much alcohol from a fitness perspective is too much? Like, you obviously have a great body. So how much, like, do you self-track how much you drink to kind of, because you live a social life. Like, you go off, you go out to a bar, you drink.
Yeah.
It's not like so what is a realistic thing? I mean, you've also done work beforehand, so maybe at this point you have a base that allows you to indulge a bit more. But just what is really the limit if you want to have, let's just say, a six pack, 12% body fat?
It's a great question, and I think it depends, of course, where your start point is, right? So, I mean, if you're quite overweight, then you're going to have to cut back a fair bit. But we work with clients that get down to kind of 12%, and they'll maybe be having a few drinks on the weekend. You're talking maybe 3 glasses of wine on a Friday or something like that, and maybe a couple of vodka. Lime and soft drinks on a Saturday. So you're maybe maxing out there at 5 drinks. The reason why that is because obviously the calorie amount, right? If you have 12 beers or something like that, you're blowing through your calories for the week. So you're definitely not going to get down to that 12% body fat. You're also there's some behavioral things that come with drinking, excessive amounts of alcohol, right? And I know this myself. When I drink probably more than 3 or 4 drinks, it turns into 10 drinks. I just have no self-control. And also then the binging comes, right? So I start to eat a lot more, junk food and things like that. And I crave like the takeaway and stuff because, that's what alcohol kind of does, right? And you're usually dehydrated when you binge drink. So if you can be controlled in it, I don't see any problem with 3 to 5 drinks a week. With some of those being kind of lower calorie ones and still getting lean. Of course, the ideal scenario would be to, minimize drinking, let's say 3 weekends of the of the month, and maybe the final weekend you go for a big blowout. So you can kind of split up how you like to do it. But for moderate drinkers or light drinkers, yeah, maybe 3 to 5 drinks. If you kind of just want to binge it in one sitting, which some people like to do, right, save it up for a big celebration, then maybe once a month, and you can kind of still stay lean. But ideally, less the better when it comes to alcohol, just because of the impacts it has on fat loss, sleep, muscle gain, and all those things too.
Yeah, recovery I know is a really massive impact on it. Now I heard something about how even a single glass of alcohol will like mess up recovery pretty substantially within like a 48-hour. Is that correct? Is that true?
Yeah, so it just destroys your sleep, man. And so where people recover, where people get bigger and stronger, isn't actually in the gym. It's when they're sleeping. So if your sleep is impaired, then your recovery is impaired. So alcohol has a huge impact on that, and you'll see it even after you have a heavy session of drinking. The nights kind of post that kind of drinking session, whether that be the Sunday night, the Monday, the Tuesday, will be you just feel rough when you sleep because of that alcohol. It really does have a bad impact.
Interesting. So it sounds like based on that, it is better, like, to contrast it. So you gave those 2 examples of guy who doesn't drink for like 3 weeks and then has a big blowout, and then you have the other example of the guy who has maybe 3 to 5 per week on like a 2-day period, Friday, Saturday night, basically. What about like if somebody were to have like 1 glass 5 days a week? Is that worse because of how it affects sleep in your perspective, or do you think at the end of the day you're just kind of it all averages out?
It's a good question. I think it depends whether you think someone can have 1 drink a night. That's the second question, because typically I find that once someone it's better that people abstain than just have 1, because it kind of breaks the cycle of the bad habit, because usually there's a habit of people drinking more than 1. I mean, if you have the self-control and you're willing to just drink 1, I don't think there'd be kind of much difference really if you had 1 3 nights a week instead of 1, just 1 night a week, right? But again, you have to think about how behavior falls into that, right? So if behavior is every time you drink 1 glass you drink 5, and you're doing that 5 nights a week, then you're really knocking up those drinks. So it kind of just depends how you behave as a person, I think.
Okay, so moving on from this into the diet cult. So I mean, obviously the keto carnivore people, they've got a big basis, they got a big community, and I think that there's a lot to be said for the diet. I don't personally follow it, but I get it. Like, I get it, but people have too many carbs today. I think that's the big thing. They have too many carbs, and that's connected to diabetes, all sorts of, obesity problems and inflammation. But I don't know. I mean, maybe I just didn't do it long enough, because I've not had carbs for, weeks, but it's, I don't know how you can get like a heavy workout in without carbs. Like, I feel like that they're just like, there's a sweet spot with them in my perspective. Like, maybe you want to make sure you're having more protein and you want to be getting healthy fats just for like brain and cellular health. When it comes to energy, I mean, I don't think ketones beat carbs, but I'm not an expert in this stuff. I mean, what do you think?
I kind of agree with you, and I can say that, from experience of kind of doing the keto diet myself and having clients come to me, energy levels are much better when they have carbs within their diet. Their workouts are better. Their potential to build muscle is a lot better because carbs are the primary energy source. And I understand the argument with keto that you break down the fats and that's used as energy. I completely get that, but I just don't think it is as efficient from a biological perspective and a performance perspective either. Think of our ancestors, right? They ate carbohydrates, they never went keto, they included potatoes and things like that into their diet, rice, whatever it was. and it's the body's primary energy source, and it's going to fuel your energy, it's going to give you focus and things like that. So I would include carbs, and I'm very much inclusive of carbs. But again, like you mentioned, there's a huge kind of carb epidemic and obesity epidemic. That's the reason as to why people have got so fat, is because they consume too many carbs. And this kind of 1 in 3 people in the States, right, are obese because majority of them are eating far too many carbs throughout the course of the day, and portions are too big. They don't understand how many are in the drinks they're having, in the the subways that they're eating, the Uber Eats and things like that, and it's skyrocketing. So if someone does cut down on carbs, I think it's a good thing to do. But that extremity of saying all carbs are bad really actually just works on the negative to people, right? It's never black and white. It's shades of gray, right? Like if you have a moderate amount of carbs, good quality carbs, that's good for you, but do be careful of the amount that you have, and make sure that obviously they're not too sugary, right?
Yeah. I mean, quality is obviously a big issue because these people are having sugar, sometimes even like corn syrup, which is particularly bad, and it's very high glycemic, raises the blood sugar quickly. But I think the really big point is also that people don't earn them. It's kind of like, if you like, I feel like in that sense, I have I can feel when I've had too many carbs per what my body needs. There's like a fatigue that kind of hits. You're it's like you just got to be like, they're designed to be active, and I think probably timing them is the best thing to do within, without getting too anal about it, I guess. But it's like, it's just funny to me to think when we talk about these diets, it's like, well, what did we used to do? And people use the examples of, mostly northern European or Inuit cultures that ate really, heavy meat diets, and then if it wasn't meat, it was dairy, which is, I guess, has sugar in it. But I mean, we're talking about really high fat kind of diets, and that this is how people were supposed to live. But the flip side is like, well, my wife is from Poland, and so I know what the cuisine's like there. And I got to tell you that in the States, we're really spoiled by seasonality, but it's not like that in Europe quite so much. You can get fruits and vegetables in the winter, but you tend not to have that served as much. In the winter, you're getting a lot of meat, and there's still potatoes, there's still the sort of root vegetables and stuff. But in the summer, it's like a completely different cuisine. People are eating fruit, there's greens everywhere, and I think guys forget, like, well, it's cold winters up there and they mostly eat meat, but there is a spring and summer. And do you think that the hunter gatherers weren't like, yeah, I'm gonna have that honey and those berries, that I see around there? Like, fruit is probably the most natural thing out there for people to eat, and I think it's kind of crazy that like people pile on fruit as if fruit's like this big problem. I don't know. It's just,
yeah, fruit's a funny one, right? Because people say, well, fruit includes sugar, so that's inherently bad for you, right? But have you ever seen anyone get fat off of just eating fruit? Of course not, right? The only way people get fat is from eating sugary, other processed foods that are causing them to gain weight, right? Fruits are very nutritious, very nutrient dense, great for focus, energy, hormones and things like that. So definitely include fruit, man. And yeah, like it's silly to kind of dismiss them from your diet, I think.
mm-hmm. So shifting gears a bit, I mean, one of the big debates in the dating community for a long period of time, and I think this is one of the most successful marketing campaigns that was ever produced in the aftermath of the game. So this book, The Game, changed personally. I mean, it was the beginning of my journey.
Same. Yeah.
It changed everybody's thinking when it came to women, that you don't need to be rich, you don't need to look a certain way. All you need is you just need to know these, you need to know game. You need to understand how women work and how to attract them, and it actually, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but it changed a lot of the general thinking about men, and it pulled a lot of the self-improvement stuff directly into the world of women. But then it started to get to a point where people started, and I think some of the marketing campaigns are responsible for this, but they would, I remember one in particular telling the story about this like guy in his mid 40s who was like overweight and living on his mom's couch, so broke. But he learned, this method, this approach, and so then he's like pulling tens at the club and stuff like that. Obviously, in hindsight, most of this stuff is complete bullshit, and even if it was true, like there was some variables that were left out. I'm sure that was responsible. There are some individuals who, when it enters their mind to be good at something, that they just grind through enormous amounts of rejection. And so they can maybe, like, I'm even just, if I'm going to say this sort of story in particular, I'm not going to name the person, but if this was even an accurate story, that how replicable is it for the average guy? But it became this big cult of game. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about game. I support game. To my framework, 3 pillars of attraction. Second pillar, very, much about game social dynamics. But there started to be a backlash, like about a decade ago. Backlash started to brew. You had, and I think a lot of the red pill was that stuff. Getting into, and it started off with like, well, maybe it's not just game. Let's look at these other structural things. And then you had the bodybuilder community as well, like looksisms and stuff like that, which kind of went into like nihilistic red pill stuff, maybe black pill, I guess is what you would call it. And they started to really think about looks as like women only care about looks, so, unless you're an attractive guy, unless you have like Ziz measurements, right? The famous Ziz. You're not going to get laid ever. No girl will ever want you. It's crazy stuff. But where do you, okay, you always played soccer, football. So it's not like you were really out of shape, but what is the main difference that you've noticed both from yourself and from clients in terms of, like, have you seen the change in how women respond to guys when they bump themselves up physically? Like, what happens?
It is a difference, and I think that one of the big things that people need to distinguish with it's the girl, from what I know anyway, and from what I found with clients, is the girl's not interested in you because you've got a six pack or big muscles. She goes, yeah, she likes that, it looks cool, but on a subconscious level, it's telling her that you are a man that has discipline, that has self-respect, and that you care about yourself. And these, I found, even with girls that I've dated, I've said, why do you go for guys that are in shape, right? If your previous exes are guys in shape, why do you do it? Do you just love six packs, right? I kind of joke with them, and they'll say, well, yeah, obviously it feels nice and blah blah blah, and it's good when you have sex, all this kind of stuff. But she goes, the main thing is these other things that attract me to the guy. It's the fact that if they're in shape, they're likely to have other things in order within their life, right? They're probably going to have good boundaries. They're going to be able to say no, right? They're going to be able to kind of take care of themselves and hopefully take care of me or take care of kids, right? They just have a foundation of discipline, and it subconsciously just says to them that you kind of have your shit together. And I think that that's probably one of the more powerful things that happen. Of course, if somebody goes from very overweight to very unattractive to ripped chad great body, then yeah, of course, on the attraction scale you're going up there, right? And you're moving into a different class of females. But if you've generally just been you're going from skinny to a little bit more muscular and jacked, I think the bigger thing is kind of the person that you've become in that process, the character it takes to build a good body, from what I've found anyway. I don't know what you kind of think about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always classified looks in the pre-selection category, so it's kind of like the marketing campaign, and it certainly gets girls interested on the offset, you
That's
know.
it.
And you don't have to do lead gen so much, you
Yeah.
know. It's like they're coming towards you now. I've noticed a phenomenon of guys who are like physically attractive. Um, and sometimes it's just because they're handsome. I mean, they're in like decent shape, but they're just very handsome. And women, like, they have guys go after them. I'm sorry, women go after those guys, girls go after those guys. And I think that the girls will often create like a fantasy around it, like that this guy's like I'm gonna get this really hot guy, and he's gonna be all this stuff. And then what she finds out is that, well, either she's doing that, she's just looking for like a lay that night, and so that's fine. If I'm gonna have sex randomly one night, I might as well be with an attractive guy, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then she may go out on a date with him, and maybe even two. But if the guy doesn't have an understanding of how women work, if he's not super sure of himself, then she kind of disappears. It's almost like she got her notch and has to kind of ease him off. And so it's definitely not enough to keep curls. I think it is enough to, like, if you're a guy who's a 9 or a 10 in looks, I think it's fair to say that you can have sex with like sevens and eights and not have to do anything. You have like about certainly a 2 point, if not 1 point differential on that. But can you keep these women? Like, absolutely not. That's been my experience with. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing. Um,
Yeah, I can resonate with that as well. I think you're right. It brings traffic in. Whether you retain the client or not is a different matter, right? I think that's definitely true. And from a lead gen perspective, a marketing perspective, it definitely helps. But maintaining that is far more than just your body, right? And I think that's the key point.
well, yeah. So this is another thing I'd kind of like to explore onto, because the point you made about girls when they see a guy who's like muscular and takes care of himself, that it expresses to her, hey, wait, this guy's like legit. This guy knows what he's doing. But I can depend on him. He's got these other, he's like a man basically. There's a masculine kind of connotation with that. But then there's also this other phenomenon of, in the bodybuilding community, there's like so much insecurity. And and like that whole site, like looksisms, right, which I know is like kind of the corner of the internet, but it was reflective of, maybe like it's the epicenter of it, the worst part of it. But it's a well-known thing in bodybuilding circles that a lot of these guys are really insecure when it comes to women, and they throw their sort of insecurity into the gym. And uh,
Yeah.
so what do you think is it just like what mindset and intention that they come into it with?
Yeah, I think as well it's a bit of a cope, right? Because if you're, doing all this work in the gym, you're kind of telling yourself, well, I'm going to put all my energy into this. I'm going to look great. I look fantastic, and it can actually bring a bit of entitlement around that. You think you're now entitled to girls because you look great, but deep down you're just kind of covering for the insecurities that you have and the fact that maybe you can't hold down a relationship, or maybe you don't understand women and you don't understand game and things like that. So I do think that for a lot of guys, it can be a big cope, in my opinion, for not actually doing the other work that it requires to maintain a healthy relationship and actually, get a hot girlfriend or whatever that is.
Yeah, it's kind of like the guys who think, if I make a lot of money and the girl's gonna like me. It's just a different
Yeah,
approach to
it's exactly like that. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Here's a juicy one. Um, what a so along with that insecurity and um not getting the attention they expected from women. Uh, you know, I've heard that within the bodybuilding community, there's a lot of, and I know you're more like fitness rather than bodybuilding. It's different, and I do want to actually talk about what the actual distinguishing factors between these different sub classifications are in fitness.
Sure.
But look, I mean, from what I've heard, if you get beneath 11% body fat, you're only getting attention from dudes. It's without.
It's true, man. It's kind of true. I tweet about this quite a lot. I say that 10 to 15% body fat, above the single digits, you're going to get nice attention from girls. You go below that, your dick's not going to work, and you're just going to get attention from guys, right? It's kind of like this kind of thing. And again, it's like the extremes that people go to, and I think from a social perspective as well, it kind of says to the girl, oh, I'm so obsessed that I need to rigorously track my food. I rigorously need to hit the gym at this time. I need to live this so routine life so I can look exactly 6% body fat for my show or whatever it is. Now, for a girl, she's like, whoa, like, I love that you got a good body, but that's just a bit crazy, man. You don't need to take it that far. And, it kind of hints on a bit of narcissism as well, right? That you're so obsessed with this, right? And deep down, healthy women anyway, I don't think they like narcissists, right? They like a guy that takes care of himself, that's in shape, but doesn't go to those extremes. And if you look at it from a social perspective, going out for dinner, drinking, and all that kind of stuff, you can't do that stuff if you're at 6 to 9% body fat unless you're taking some sort of steroids, right? And that's going to fuck you up even more if you're drinking on that. So if you and I think you've said this before in one of your talks, as a man, if you can get yourself between 10 to 15, that's a really good range, a beach body range where you look great, you can still have a social life, you can still drink alcohol, you can have fun, and you're actually way more dynamic, right? Your testosterone levels are optimized at this kind of body fat percentage. You have good energy levels, you can have good focus, you're going to be able to be successful in business at this range, right? It's kind of just like the holy grail of body fat percentage, I call it. But yeah, if you kind of slip a little bit too low, it's kind of, if you get too high, you go to the extreme, and it has a negative impact on your life, I think.
Yeah, and women like a guy who's disciplined and a guy who's self-controlled, self-contained, but they also don't like guys who are sort of anal retentive and can't go out and have fun. And I think this is the balance of those two things is a difficult. It's difficult, I think, for a lot of guys in the manosphere to understand that. Like, women, especially younger women, especially women who are like being like self-contained and self-controlled. I'm not saying it doesn't create some desire, but it's kind of more of like a comfort thing in the end. Like, wow, this guy's stable, and I don't mean in like the kind of saying like, oh, he's got a paycheck kind of stable. I mean like a higher level stable, like he's emotionally stable. If something happens, I can depend on him. Like, this is real stuff that women care about. It's not bullshit. A lot of the Red Pill guys want to dismiss comfort does not matter, and it's really serious stuff. It matters to women. But then there is like, well, the guy who parties, knows how to have a good time, the rock star musician. I mean, you think he's counting his macros, you know what I mean? Like, because he's creating an emotional experience for her, and that's what she's drawn to. The guy who's overly disciplined, overly regimented, can become boring, right?
Very
Just
true.
like the guy who's overly carefree and spontaneous can become, I guess you could say, unreliable and maybe even untrustworthy. That you can't really depend on him at all. So it's the balance of these two things, and that's why I think it's good. That range is great for a lot of reasons, because you're maxing out everything. I mean, even if you're only at like 14-15%, like the kind of outer ends of it. I mean, for a guy who's just trying to have energy and have fun and look attractive, I mean, I think that's probably, if you're going towards like 11-12%, then there's more of an athletic focus. But either one is kind of good. It's just when you get to, especially when you get to 20%, then you've really let yourself go.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And it's about having that balance that you spoke about that's going to allow you to look great, but also have that spontaneity in your life that's going to excite a girl, right? That you're going to take a trip somewhere and you're going to eat what you want and enjoy yourself and be fun. And she's going to be on this roller coaster of emotions, because she's not going to get that when you're, opening your Tupperware and eating your chicken, right? It's just not going to work. So, yeah, I resonate.
1 second, I got to get my my cord, because the thing's dying. I thought it was going to last longer.
All good.
But one of the things I wanted to just seed in your mind for the next question is fitness chicks. This is like a whole thing I'm really interested in.
Okay. Yeah, sure. All right, man.
All right, so go. Fitness chicks.
What's the question about fitness chicks?
Two things with them. So the first are the girls at the gym. Now, like, I go to Attilis. And
Okay.
I don't know if you know about Attilis.
No, what's Attilis?
Attilis is kind of like a big gym in the States now, only because it kind of, well, everything got a little slow for a second here. Let me let it all catch up. So Attilis is a gym in South Jersey, and the only thing special about it is that they stood up to the mandates in the state. So they got a lot of political attention. One of the co-owners recently ran for Congress. So I don't think he won, but at any rate, it's a great gym, really great energy in there. It's also like a classic gym, like circa 1970 something. So started in the era of Arnold and
Nice.
all that kind of stuff. So actually, and actually maybe we'll hit this question first about the different sort of niches in that fitness industry, because these guys, there's bodybuilding in there. It's like really, it's bodybuilders and power lifters. And so, like, can you just talk a little bit about these different groups? Like, what's the story with these different groups? Like, what is the, I guess I'm just trying to understand, how would you differentiate yourself as a fitness coach from like a bodybuilder?
Is this regarding fitness chicks or just regarding?
We'll go back to the fitness chicks. I just wanted to get this one first because I'm
Okay.
talking about the kind of orbiter girls in some ways with this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So typically, a bodybuilding coach is mainly focused on predominantly weight training, very kind of strict food prep, eating certain amounts of, these meals, eating these meals very consistently, kind of the old school kind of bodybuilder bro, right? Training heavy, training to failure, that kind of stuff. Doing kind of like, your bodybuilding rep ranges, 10 to 15 reps, fasted cardio in the morning. That's kind of your typical bodybuilder, right? Taking Tupperware with them everywhere and things like that. You then got powerlifters, right? So powerlifters are much more, they're the guys that are on the squat rack. They're doing 11 sets of about 1 or 2 reps, okay? They're dressed in the belt, squat shoes, and things like that. They do tons and tons of sets, but it's very kind of just short, explosive, powerful movements and things like that. These guys usually typically can kind of be on a little bit more of the bigger side as well. So they're not as lean as the bodybuilders that are kind of focused on the small waist, the wide shoulders, and things like that. So those are kind of the big differences there. And like, I myself personally am a fitness coach. So, I work very broadly on things. I wouldn't say I'm an extreme as a bodybuilder, but I also apply principles from bodybuilding to what I do, the same as I apply, principles from powerlifting that help with your kind of strength and things like that. So I'd say I kind of take the best from these different disciplines and try to apply it with context where necessary for my clients. But yeah, if you're looking at the kind of powerlifters and bodybuilders, that's kind of the two camps that you'll see in most gyms.
Okay, so the like, sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of classic theory is that higher rep ranges are better for aesthetic definition and
Muscle gain, yeah, and muscle gain, yeah.
Yeah, and lower ones are strength.
Strength-based,
And,
strength and power.
and so when we say strength and power, that how so this is you know I think it can be confusing for the layman when we have one's for building muscle and one's for building strength, and it's like, well, is it neurological wiring that's occurring with it, like CNS? Is that the big thing that's happening that creates more strength for that rep range, that it creates more, there's more focus on training the neurological system?
Yeah, so with powerlifting there will be, but it's just generally the intensity in which you're lifting at, right? So if you're lifting a weight from, 1 to 3 reps, the the weight that you've got on that bar is going to be much heavier than the weight you're lifting from 10 to 15 reps. So definitely there's, a change in intensity, but also that's going to stress out the nervous system a lot more when you're doing the shorter kind of reps and the heavier intensity and things like that. But again, with fitness, you can actually bridge both and get good results, right? And you may have seen like power building, right, which comes quite popular. So that's a mix of power building days and hypertrophy strength days, and that's kind of actually how I've trained for many years, right, where I combine the higher rep range with some lower rep ranges on compounds and things like that. And the key with muscle gain is, are you lifting more sets, reps, and weight over time progressively and recovering and things like that. Now, you can do that in any rep range, but typically, it's kind of more time effective and generally better from a muscle building point of view to do it from the 8 to 15 rep range. Now, if you throw in some lower rep work, you're still going to build muscle if you're progressively overloading, but maybe not to the degree if you were doing as much hypertrophy work, if that makes sense. So there kind of is an overlap there, but the main difference is kind of the intensity that it works at and obviously the stress that it puts on the nervous system.
Okay, cool. So within the sort of fitness community, let's talk about fitness girls. So I'm kind of curious about this on a couple different levels, because one of the questions I get a lot is approaching a girl at the gym. So let's just first attack that angle. I mean, you have girls obviously at a gym, but it depends on the gym. Like when I was going with that comment on Attilas, is that it's a male heavy gym, but you can't. It's almost like you can have a female only space, but you can't have a male only space unless you actually say no women allowed.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the women are going to come there.
Yeah,
And
of course.
it's the same thing. So you have you have like a bunch of like, I don't want to be, I don't mean in any negative way. They're really into it too. They really, train pretty heavy too, but it's obvious that they're usually with, a bodybuilding guy, or less often a powerlifting guy.
Okay. Yeah.
But so I mean, those ones are kind of, I don't know what your experience is with like girls in the fitness space. Like what do you I'm kind of being open-ended here. I'm just like, girls in the fitness space, do you notice a different kind of mentality around girls who are like really fitness heavy versus ones that aren't?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think these girls, they typically are interested in the bodybuilder type guys and things like that for sure over the powerlifter. And they seem to desire the kind of like, the Chad meme, right? The guy with the wide shoulders, the small waist and things like that. Very much so, that I've found. And they seem to have a interest in the way they look as well. There's a reason why they're in the gym. So sometimes they can be, not to be negative, not narcissistic, but really they take pride in their appearance and they like to show that they've got a good body as well, right? Whether that be flaunting things on Instagram and things like that. So sometimes these girls, they can be quite high maintenance because the fact is that they're working on their body, they're already pretty, they're getting lots of attention. It's just a way to get a lot of attention to go to a gym for the guys, right? And it's a good way for them to be hit on. And that's another thing I found is you'll actually find a lot of single girls at the meathead gyms because they know that at some point some guy's gonna come hit on them, right? And it happens a lot, right? Because there's going to be footfall, right? And there's going to be guys that are fueled up with testosterone there. So sometimes it's a kind of indirect way of them to try and get picked up, I found, which is quite interesting too.
So if you're not at like, so that's a good advice for girls who are looking to try to get like a Chad guy.
Yeah.
Go to one of these serious gyms and
Yeah.
hang out there, and you're probably going to get some guy to, help you with your form or whatever.
Yeah.
But for your average guy though, who's just at a regular sort of fitness gym, maybe it's a little more split evenly. Maybe your corporate gym, right? How do you recommend guys go approach women there? Because it's not like in the case where, like, we're not talking about, okay, if you're like the most jack guy in the space, or if you're way more competent in this stuff than the girl, like she comes into Attilas, and you have guys there who have been training since they were 14, 12 maybe, obsessively. They know their way around a gym. They have all of the built-in authority in that environment. I mean, they can just literally see that she's an idiot with this stuff and talk to her, and it's easy, right?
Yeah.
But if you're just kind of like an average guy, you have, decent shape, how do you go about talking to a girl at the gym?
It's a really good question, and I think that, if the you could say that the hypergamy is not there, it's going to be obviously difficult to, kind of score a high quality girl at the gym if, let's say, maybe you're not a jack guy, right? Obviously if there's other things going for you, then great, and you kind of want to play to those strengths. But I think just generally in gyms being friendly, right? It kind of just, this might be counterintuitive advice, you might think, but I just generally think being friendly with people and girls at the gym is a great way to talk to them. Especially, I've heard of people go to yoga classes, right? So I know guys that go to yoga classes full of girls because they're the only guy there. Now the girls, they sometimes think, oh, this guy's gay, right? But actually you're not. You're just there for yoga, and you end up chatting with all these girls, being really friendly, and they find out you're straight. And as long as you're not a weirdo, you've got a bit of social skills, you can actually kind of chat up some pretty hot girls doing that. And I'll even say I've been to yoga classes before, right, and talk to girls that way, and things like that. It's a really good way to do things, because if you're not in like the meathead section, that a lot of their guard is down, right? If you walk over to her and she's the only girl in the weights area, right, she's going to be a bit intimidated in an average gym, right? That's just the way it is. But if she's in a yoga class full of other girls and you're the guy there and you say, hey, I think that that's a much more kind of successful strategy to do things. And I know the guys that do that quite well.
Yeah, it's almost like the inverse of the girl going to like the hardcore bodybuilder gym. Although with the caveats that it's you don't want to still be incompetent. Like a girl can go into an environment and be incompetent around a guy.
Of course.
It doesn't hurt her. It might even help her, actually. But a guy doing that in yoga, I mean, it's, unless he's like a fit, charming guy, but he's a little
This
clumsy.
is it. Yeah, this is it, right? You gotta be fit, and you gotta have a bit of charm, and you can't go in there looking like an idiot, because, like you said, the girl is just gonna think of you as some weird guy. Why is he in here doing yoga, right? You kind of want to stay away from that kind of perspective that they kind of look at you as, right? But if you've got a bit of charm and you kind of, again, got just good social skills, you don't have to be super jacked to do that. You can really score in a yoga studio for sure, in a yoga class.
I think what's so interesting about this is that we see really competing theories of sexual selection going on here. Like, and this is an ongoing argument about who really selects who. So you look at, in the bodybuilding kind of situation, you have guys who are, pursuing excellence. Let's just say that, and women are going to where those guys are because they see guys who are, rising in the dominance hierarchy. And it's not just bodybuilding stuff, right? It was the same thing in jobs in like corporate America. When women first started to come in there, they come in there as secretaries. When they go to college, they went to sister schools, to like Ivy League, so they could meet guys who are coming out of, like, it's a perennial thing that, and Jordan Peterson would always talk about this, about the dominance hierarchy, and that women after guys who compete against each other in the dominance hierarchy. And so you can look at that, and that's kind of like a I think that you can say it's kind of like a patriarchal structure,
Yeah.
patriarchal structure, because you have the the men who ascend to the top take the spoils. Basically, they'll get the most
Yeah.
women. But then you have this other phenomenon that happens too, which is that, you know, women. So women, it's a women's yoga class, and they don't mind if you're there if you're appealing to them.
Yeah.
Then they want you there, and then they kind of, might even, if you really know game, they might even kind of compete over you within that area. But and so you can have a harem of women, but it's like a matriarchal kind of selection
Yeah.
in terms
It's
of
is
how it occurs.
weird. Yeah, it's very weird. But I also think it's a case of potential supply and demand as well when you look at it from that perspective, right? If you're the only guy in there, maybe if there were 10 other guys in there, you wouldn't stand a chance, right? So again, it's like there's not much competition in that area, but if you can solidify yourself in that space and win some charm and trust, you can be successful. So I think that is at play as well, for sure.
Well, that's true. I just want to say this. So this is, but let's say you had 10 women and 10 men in
Yeah.
there. It's kind of like, let's just say it's feminine energy environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll continue with it as being yoga, but let's just say, so the numbers are equal, but it's kind of like a feminine domain.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, the women are going to select, one or two of those guys, and they're going to be kind of, interested in those guys and not
Mm-hmm.
the other ones.
Yeah.
But it's like, whether the women are the ones doing it, or the guy at the top, the guy who rises to the top of his merits, he can, he has the choice of all the women down there. But it also goes the other direction, that the women all collectively will choose one or two guys
Mm.
as well. And so it's always this kind of, whether it's men or women doing it, it's always that the a smaller number of men get the spoils.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's really interesting to think about this, because this is like, we have arguments over structuring society, and it's funny, because a lot of what we see in modern society, they've been like dismantling the patriarchy, but it's really, it's almost like, but they're still elevating only a small number of men to get the sexual spoils. It's just that the men aren't deciding amongst themselves who deserves them. The women are. And so then we get into this whole thing about, like, well, what qualities are women rewarding versus men? And this is, I think, where it gets really interesting, because we have, among men, obvious, like, you have stuff like strength, right? Strength matters. Um, Power and success matters. A lot of it's more of like how much you control, and how much influence you have over how things are done. Whereas in the other one, it's much more of like, how can you make the women feel?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of emotions you generate in the women is interesting. I guess that the big thing here is, well, what do you think? What do you think? I mean, from this, especially with like the fitness overlap, because it seems like a lot of, this has been like a really, especially if you get into, like, Bronze Age pervert and stuff like that, and that whole world about, well, is the pursuit of a male, of like a heroic male figure, let's say, is that catering to the feminine, or is it to the masculine?
Hmm. I think it's a great question. I think women are always going to be interested and attracted to the guys with the higher status, the higher power, the very masculine kind of energy, right? And I think again that goes with the masculine, the lead generation and the marketing point, right? They're going to generally be attracted to that. But I think that feminine side of things on how they're made felt is very important when it comes to retaining a woman and, you know, having a long-term relationship and developing that too. So I think that, you know, as a man, you definitely need to develop all of those things. But to say, you know, is it one or the other? I'd say that it's a mix, right? But I don't think that, you know, again, men will have a chance if they don't develop these things, right? If you're not maxing out on, you know, your body, you're not maxing out on, you know, your influence, your status and things like that, you're not going to have as much traffic and as much opportunity, I think, with the women to then do that other kind of stuff with, right? I think that is very important to build. But again, you can have all of this stuff, but if you don't have that other side, the understanding of the female's emotions, you don't have an understanding of how she works, what makes her tick and that kind of thing, that's going to mean that you're going to keep jumping from women to women but never really retaining one, right? Like that's kind of how I look at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And I think a lot of this ultimately comes down to, I mean, obviously as a man, you want to have both.
Of course.
Both. We look at older patriarchal structures, and let's just like take the 1950s, which, by the way, I just need to say this. People have probably heard me say it before, but I'm not really like a huge fan on the romanization of the 1950s, which was not I mean, it's just such a abnormal period in history. You had some, you know, like all these women sitting at home doing nothing, 90% marriage rate. That's not normal in any point in history. The marriage rate was more like 80%, and women were always working. I mean, they just were not maybe working in a corporate job, but they were doing stuff at the family business. They were working on the family farm. I mean, they just did different division of labor, but you know, you never had like an idle woman who would just sit at home and, you know, watch television and grind up against the washing machine. You know, no wonder they're doing that. I mean, boring as anything. I mean, look, I'm not trying to also go throw the baby out with the bathwater and say a lot of women weren't happy in some ways, but let's just say this is like, that's kind of like a peak, and I would almost argue like artificial patriarchy kind of situation where you had you had everything, like everything was kind of funneled directly to the man, and the man sort of, like, the woman's needs didn't really matter directly in the relationship. There were kind of contractual aspects. Yeah, I'm going to make money, what else do you want? You know, I'm going to, like, I'll get stuff done. But it was not a very emotionally involved kind of dynamic. Whereas if we flip to this sort of matriarchal one, and I see this, by the way, a lot in like spirituality communities, new age spaces, heavy feminine environment. Um, in those, if you go to like one of those meetings or meetups or, you know, organizations, you're going to get 80% women there. And of the men that are there, 3 out of 4 are not going to have any masculine energy to them whatsoever. I mean, it's so if you're that like 5% of the group there, that 20-25% of the guys who actually has masculinity, and you're around all those women, they're really, really drawn towards you. You can really clean up fairly easily if you, but it's kind of interesting how this whole thing works though, because it's almost like the guy is elevated by the women, but he doesn't actually have any power, in the sense that if he steps out of, it's kind of like the women say, because we like you, you're gonna get the sexual fruit. You know, we'll all, you know, sleep with you. And I'm not saying it's all like necessarily super clean like that, but you can see how it can kind of come to this logical outcome where
Yeah.
And you see this with like the elevation of certain celebrities, like Pete Davidson, like total degenerate looking loser. I mean, so what on earth is going on with this? This is like a matriarchal kind of amplification of him, pulling him up to this point of like, Pete, we'll all fuck you, Pete Davidson, but you don't have any, you exist for our pleasure. And by the way, the kids that come from that you're not having anything to do with them. It's like, we're taking your seed and that's it. I mean, I'm like going down the rabbit hole with this, but this is kind of how I see it. Whereas it's the opposite with the 1950s sort of, and maybe prior, at least in the royalty circles, like super patriarchal structure where it's like, you as a woman, you're going to provide me as a man with my progeny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we raise this together, but you're under my sort of leadership with it. It's just a very interesting. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. I think a lot of guys, and my concern with game is that a lot of guys use game, and even a lot of the development of game has come with like moving away from the sort of masculine dominance hierarchy one to this sort of, well, if I can just please the women or I can make the women interested in me, I don't have to do anything. I can have all the sex, and why bother going and doing all this stuff? And I think a lot of the red pill preys on that frustration of guys who are like, wait, I thought I was doing dominance hierarchy and this fucking guy isn't.
Yeah.
He's just flattering her. He's just doing, it's really interesting. It's really interesting how it's all, and that's really like the big battle here is like, which side are you on? What do you think? Are there pros? What are the pros and cons to each side?
So I think, like you said, with just the over reliance on kind of game, it prevents you from wanting to do the other hard things that I think really do make you a man, right? Whether that is building a business, building yourself, the very kind of like masculine kind of traits. That's, a lot of guys get good at game and they don't worry about getting in shape. They don't worry about the money. They don't worry about looking good because they're very proficient at famousing women and things like that, right? Which, it builds the social skills side, but it doesn't build anything else. You then have the other side where when you're overly or hyper masculine, you really just kind of think that, okay, that's all I need, and you don't develop this other side of attraction and developing that with women. You think, right, just because I've got all of this kind of stuff, that I'm gonna kind of get the woman. Whereas I think really it's kind of like that balance in between, or even steering a little bit towards kind of the masculine side, where you say, hey, look, I'm a man on my purpose, I want to be successful, I'm working on all of these areas of my life. However, there is that feminine part of me, or that other side of me, which can understand a female's emotions. It can be spontaneous, it can be fun, that can meet her needs and things like that. But it's always going to be on this continuum, and depending on the type of man and person you are will depend on kind of where you fall in that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense, and I think a lot of this stuff, like my sort of perspective on it is that obviously the patriarchal one has a lot of benefits to it.
Of course.
I mean, this is how you build a society. I don't really see the matriarchal structure offering much in that regard. Now, I think theoretically, if if a lot of the women today had more wisdom, you could maybe have a little bit of a different thing. Like a lot of native tribes would have a similar kind of dynamic where the women would elevate, and like the women would, like I think in the Iroquois, so one of the New York tribes, but I think maybe in the Iroquois Confederation, the women actually selected the man to rule the tribe, and before like guys jump on that and get pissed off, the idea was not that they were trying to pick some weakling that they could control. They were trying to pick a guy who they felt had heart, let's say, who wasn't simply someone who was out for his own personal ambition and was going to abuse the tribe in that way. So they looked, it's kind of like they were sizing them up, but that takes wisdom. And I think unfortunately a lot of the women today, when you see this stuff play out, it's very narcissistic and gratification based. Not that the masculine one can't be as well and have its own issues with it, but but I don't see how it scales into anything really grand, the matriarchal.
Mm-hmm. I agree on that.
It just doesn't seem like the women have any interest in that, because even if a man's ambitious, they're attracted to it, but there's always these kind of issues with comfort, that the guy isn't around as much as he should be, and it's tough for a lot of women to deal with. But what I actually think, and I'll probably piss off a lot of people in both directions on this, but I think we're moving towards more of an integration of this stuff, where we're going back to like male-led relationships, but it's also their male-led relationships that require the consent of the women. It's not like a dynamic. It's like an integrated relationship, and I would say like it's an integrated game too in the process. Like Nash, Days of Game on Twitter, is a great guy, and he had some critiques of stuff. I don't even know when I wrote that piece, but he had some critiques of some argument that something I talked about with Game. And I think that the big issue there is like very semantic, because we were talking about this, and we're talking about these guys who know how to play to a woman's ego and get her. I mean, well, that's Game. But I mean, well, but if you're also showing up as a man and you're leading interaction, and that's turning a woman on, and you're leading things to sex, let's say, well, that's also Game. That's a very different feel. And so we don't really have good terminology to describe, well, what are we talking about here?
I get you. Yeah.
So switching back, I'm curious about, you don't have to name any names. This is totally separate topic, unless you have anything else you wanted to add on that.
No, I think you articulated that very well. Yeah, nothing else to add.
Okay. So what's it like dating like a fitness chick? Have you dated a fitness chick?
I have, yeah.
So what's it like dating a fitness chick versus just like a regular chick who's, attractive?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I've actually found is that fitness chicks have a higher sex drive than other girls, right? Like it's a weird dynamic, and I don't know whether it's because they spend a lot of time working out and all of this kind of stuff and kind of like building the body, but the girls I've dated that are fitness chicks I just tend to be having sex with them more, and their sex drive is much higher, which maybe that's because they feel great from the endorphins of working out or whatever it is, but they just kind of naturally, and I think this is because when they work out, they're kind of building, and this sounds a bit strange, but again, just kind of like intention in what they're doing. They have kind of more intention in a sexual way too. So if they kind of want to have sex, they're going to be pushing for it a lot more than the girls that are, let's just say, very attractive, but maybe they don't work out. They're just not as, their drive for sex is not as high. I don't know why. Maybe it's also because if you're working out a lot and you're checking out each other's bodies, again, the physical attraction there is there quite a lot too, which is strange. So yeah, fitness chicks have a higher sex drive, I found. I would also say that when it comes to fitness chicks, one of the key things too is sometimes, and this isn't for all of them, but sometimes they're just not as, let's say, stable as maybe some other chicks, right? And they're very much up and down in their emotions, and the reason as to why that may be is because they use health and fitness to kind of help regulate that as well. And health and fitness and training is a way for them to regulate their emotions of being up and down, and that helps them manage it. So those would probably be the two things that I've noticed myself. Yeah.
That's super interesting. And you know what? Like, it's totally true with the higher sex drive. I'm sure it's what you said, that, you know, she's confident in herself and how she looks. And, you know, assuming that you're also a fit guy, it's like two fit people, they're going to have sex more. I mean, a major reason that people aren't having sex as much today is because not even physically attractive. I mean, you know, I just hate to say it so bluntly, but if you have two really fat people together, it's like, well, we only have sex like once every 3 months. It's like, well,
yeah.
I mean, are you guys fantasizing about each other that much? You know, it's probably not. Probably there's not a lot of just visceral desire.
Mm-hmm.
So no doubt that plays a role. And also confidence is a huge connection to sex drive. And I think this is one that guys don't take as seriously as they should, especially in relationships. They wonder, well, why is their woman like not want to have sex as much? A lot of it has to do with her own sort of self-esteem and confidence, and, you know, level of exhaustion, right? And so if they're exercising, they have more energy, and they feel good about how they look and how they feel, they want to have sex more. It's just kind of more there. So I definitely agree with that. I also wonder, two other things though. To your last point, you have these girls who are up and down with emotions. Now, you can't say that with like full confidence that always correlates to higher sex, but there is a, you know, emotional volatility often is connected to, like, okay, we're in a fight, we got to have sex now, kind of dynamic. So I wonder if there is some element with girls, if they do have some sort of anxiety they're trying to manage, that translates into like a hypersexual kind of dynamic, because hypersexuality and anxiety are like really strongly correlated with each other.
Yeah, it makes sense. Also, I think from a emotional high and emotional low, I think a lot of chicks kind of dig that, right? If they're, let's say, dating a guy that's very kind of middle of the track, right, doesn't really spike the emotions in a negative or positive way, they're kind of just like, okay, we're having sex again, this is a bit boring, right? Whereas this, if this guy's making you a little bit up, he's making you a bit down, he's making you guess and you're not sure, this chick's gonna be like, her emotions will be up and down. That's gonna turn her the fuck on, man, seriously. And you see it with guys that are, the typical, you could say, asshole, right, that are, kind to them 1 minute, a dick to them the next minute. These girls go crazy for these guys, and I think a big reason is their emotions are being spiked and going up and down all the time, and like you said, that leads to good sex.
Yeah, and that's good game, and that's good game in a relationship.
Of course.
You're always going off on them with complimenting them, building them up, and then teasing them and making fun of them.
The push pull.
Yeah, the push pull. You always do it. You always do it. I mean, I think a lot of guys misunderstand relationship game because they think of it so much as like the mystery's gone. It's like, yeah, the mystery's gone, but on that deeper level it's gone, but you still have the kind of micro stuff of like, where is he with me at this moment? Is he, how's he making me feel on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, some of the darker game gets manipulative with it, and I think dread game is heavily manipulative and fucked up. And I've only ever rarely like been okay with it, and when I've been okay with it, I've been okay with it tactically, not strategically. I've been like, yeah, this will probably work, but what do you really want?
Yeah.
like do you really want this kind of dynamic? And you only do that when the desire is really dropped with a girl, and so you have to really make her question herself in her own value. But it's kind of like, I don't think any kind of game that fundamentally affects a woman's self-esteem is good.
No.
Like you want to be bringing the person you're with up. Teasing is totally different. That's just playing with energy. She knows that you're not actually, it's that's just almost like a dance, you know.
Yeah.
It's like you bring her low when you're dancing with her, but you don't drop her, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
But there's another thing with these fitness girls that may be part of the sex drive thing, and I don't know, this may only apply to a really more intense grouping of them, but obviously putting on muscle increases testosterone.
Yeah.
And of course there are some girls who even use testosterone, and I've heard that they are really rabid, like sexually. But even for your natty girl who just simply trains really hard, especially on the muscle side of things, women have way less testosterone than men. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that even just like marginal changes in that have like marginal changes affect them dramatically. Like this, women only have a small amount of testosterone, but like you only need a little bit of a shift, and it shocks the whole system.
It does. Yeah, that's true. I think women have 15 times less testosterone than men. So when you look at it from a muscle building point of view, of course, a woman's never going to get as big and, as alpha as a guy, let's say. But you're right that the spike in the change when they
2022, you can't say that.
The spike in the change, you could say, in their behavior when that testosterone increases a little bit can be quite vast. And again, that goes back to the point I made about kind of like that attention and assertiveness from the woman to want to have sex, right? Because they're kind of like their testosterone's affecting them in a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the sex part's good. But would you say that, I mean, it didn't work out, right?
Yeah.
So why didn't it? I mean, I'm not saying that you have to go into specific things with specific relationships, but I mean, like, why didn't it work out? Do you think what's like, are they also just a little self-absorbed, a little bit more, not like, like you talked about girls like really obsessed with Instagram and showing off? Do they?
Yeah, I think that has a big impact as well. And I think just generally, like, kind of the girls that I'm very much attracted to are kind of the very feminine types, right? Because I like a girl that's just very feminine in lots of different ways, and I generally just am attracted to that. Now, a girl that's a bit more balanced or a bit more, you could even say on the masculine side, I found that they can sometimes be like that when they're a fit chick, because they're like, right, I need to go to the gym, I need to do this. They're kind of just very like direct, organized, and things like that. And I'm not slagging it off. There's nothing particularly wrong with that, but maybe that just kind of doesn't work with me. I'm kind of the one that likes to take the lead, and maybe that's the reason as to why things haven't worked out. Maybe I just haven't found the right fitness chick yet either, right? Maybe that's another thing. So that would probably be maybe what it is. It might just be my own kind of personal preference, maybe.
I was just thinking of a meme. I'm not going to tell the meme.
What's the meme?
It's this is like, someone posted this maybe like 4 years ago on Frog Twitter. I don't know why it stuck in my mind, but it had some super jacked woman.
Yeah.
Clearly had been doing. I mean, I don't know, maybe not, but I think clearly had been on some cycle, and she had these like big fake tits, and it caption said, "Would you let muscle mommy milk you?"
Oh man.
Anyway, well, man, Oliver, this I think if I can go on beyond that one. Any last? I mean, I'm gonna put all the links to your stuff beneath here, but like, tell us a bit what kind of you focus your work with entrepreneurs. Tell us a bit about your program, what your offerings are.
Yeah, for sure. So I work with entrepreneurs and high performers on a year-long program. So we tend to work with kind of three stages. We want you to look great, which is obviously the physical look, feel great, which is kind of internally your health being good, and be great. So obviously performing, having focus and things like that. So we have a 12-month structured program in which we do that, working with myself and my team. And yeah, we also have intense 90-day programs too, which work on kind of just cutting up the body fat, reducing kind of the gut and just getting stronger and feeling good in the space of 3 months. So yeah, we've got those two things, and you can check me out on Twitter, which is the Oliver Anwar.
Okay, so with these programs, they're very bespoke, the year-long programs to someone's.
Yeah, everything's very tailored, right? So if you come in and you have specific issues, for instance, let's say you got suboptimal test levels and you need to lose a load of weight, then we kind of focus in on those specific things. If potentially you're on the more slender end and you need to kind of like bulk up and maybe work on optimizing your sleep, then we focus on that. So everything is kind of personalized and tailored in what we do. But we kind of hit on those three areas in the program that we do.
Gotcha. And it comes with is there like a meal kind of planning aspect to it, or is it really
Yeah. So we focus on four key pillars really. So the first pillar is around optimal exercise. The second one's around optimal nutrition. We then focus on sleep and recovery, and then the final part is kind of like lifestyle and mental health. So kind of these four sections are the things we focus on to kind of get you to that end destination of looking great, feeling great, and being great.
That's awesome. I'm gonna put that stuff all in the description below for so people got everybody who wants to work with Oliver. The information is going to be there. Last thing though, I want to actually, was going to close it out, but I have one last question for if you don't mind.
Sure.
What do you think mentally holds people back from being able to improve their body? Like why is health? Because to bring this whole thing full circle, the first topic that we talked about today, we were talking about like how it doesn't need to be so complicated. And yet we look at countries, and I know there's a lot of other factors with like poison food supply, etc. But I mean, you've got 2/3, 3/4 of a country, and hardly alone in this, overweight, obese. Obviously, it is hard. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's simple, but it's hard. So what do you think is holding people back mentally from being able to take care of themselves?
It's a really good question, and I think that it is really in two camps, and that is education and environment, right? Those are the two things. And I think that education-wise, most people just don't know proper nutrition and what to eat and how much food they're actually eating and what is good for them, right? Like the general population don't know that. And the second one is their environment's terrible. So they're going to be around in offices with terrible food, surrounded by junk that's around them. So when their willpower is low, they're just going to go for that. Now, you can obviously improve your discipline, but the two key things here is if you're educated right and you understand what's in foods and also your environment's good, it's much easier to be disciplined, right? If you look at it in that respect. So I definitely would say those two things are key. And just the final part is just general accountability, man. If you had somebody that you have to check in with and that you need to be accountable to, that's huge. That would be kind of the icing on the cake. But those two things, environment and education, for sure.
Yeah, it's very, like, you look at it and a lot of people will judge the average individual for being so out of shape. And look, you can't take away responsibility from them, but it really is like a structural systemic thing.
Of course.
You have to not only wake up to it, and not just wake up, be like, oh yeah, I'm fat, like
Yeah.
like get it, like
Of course.
understand. And then you have to, fight against it on a continuous basis, or more, better, try to get out of that environment, get out of that system.
That's right.
But that starts to, then you start to leave the whole system structure itself, which I guess is doing right now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Kind of interesting how it all fits together.
Yeah, look at it from, let's say Mediterranean people and people in the US, right? Would you say that Mediterranean people have, more discipline than people in the US? I don't think that's true, right? I think the reason is they're in a much different environment. The nutrition that they eat is so much more different. Their lifestyle environment is so much different, and the consensus around the way that they eat, their education is much better when it comes to their food than it is over in the States, right? And I think that's mainly down to the environment.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things to add with this. The first is definitely we'll just touch on it, the food supply. Because the food supply situation, I mean, really, people who are only in the States, I'm getting like this halo glow now from all this. People who are only in the States just do not understand how poison their food supply is. They just don't get it. Like they kind of scoff at it. People are like, "Oh yeah," like you really don't get it. Like eating in Poland, when I could I'm dealing with like Polish grandparents, you know what I mean? They're just like force feeding you food. You're eating so much you feel sick. You're like starting to yell at the grandma. You're never supposed to yell at grandma, but you do it because you just can't eat anymore. And this was happening to me. I come back from the trip and I've lost weight. I mean, my wife is very thin, but when she came over here, she started to get some breakouts. She never had breakouts when she was living in Europe. So, I mean, there's definitely something really messed up. And I mean, you can go into atrazine and what they're doing to the frogs. And that is part of it, but there's a lot of other stuff too with, GMO stuff, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But the other thing, is the walking.
It's true. Walking's huge.
Because I will say this, I mean, I lived in Manhattan for 7 years, and there's not a lot of fat people in Manhattan. And part of that's because, 25% of the population, or at least the white population there, is certainly European, like not stateside. So they've come over from there. But I mean, you're gonna walk. You can't avoid walking on a given day there, and really you're probably going to walk a few miles even if you take the subway. So it's very different from the suburbs, where it's like we're gonna drive to the office, get out, drive back, drive to get food, you're driving everywhere else in America. So Manhattan had, in my opinion, I know people who are in Newport Beach and stuff will disagree, but in my opinion, the most attractive people in the United States. Like, and I could always tell going from Philadelphia to New York because
really?
on the transit, because you could tell who lived in what place and who lived in the other. People in New York were better dressed and they were fitter, and the people in Philly, and I'm a Philly guy, I'm not trying to hate. Well, anyway, Oliver, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time coming on. Really excited to have the guys get to know you, get to know your services, and thank you for sharing your wisdom, man.
Anytime, man. Appreciate having me on, Pat. This was great, and big fan of the podcast and the work you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, bro. We'll see you on Twitter.
See you on Twitter, man.